What up, everyone? Welcome to the Twice Over Movies podcast. I'm your host, Faraz. Today is our discussion episode for The Fountain. This was a listener-suggested film. So, if you have a suggestion for us, hit us up at The Twice Over on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, and we will take it into consideration. Make sure you are subscribed to our podcast so you don't miss any new episodes. Generally, on Mondays we release our spoiler-free previews, and on Thursdays we release our discussion episodes. Check out our feed on your podcast app for all of our previous episodes, which include movies such as La La Land, A Serious Man, Prisoners, Into the Wild, 1917, Parasite, and many others. Alright, so here is our discussion for The Fountain with myself, Fahad, and our special guest, Usher.
Okay, so let's get some things easier to talk about. So Rachel Weisz exists as Izzy and the Queen, right? The Queen in the past, the old timeline where she's the Queen of Spain. Hugh Jackman, he plays Tommy in present day, Conquistador in whatever.
The Spain timeline.
Yeah, and then I want to call it Space Monk. Do you guys want to agree on those terms, or you want to change it up a little bit?
Sure.
Space Monk is fine.
Space Monk is fine? All right.
Okay, yeah, so this is what I would say.
By the way, I want to interject because I'm not entirely sure I would use, or that I would say, three timelines. And the reason is because I think there's just two timelines. There's the present and then there's a future. But then there's a separate, and I don't know if I'd call it a timeline.
All right, so we have three stories, right? We have the story that we're going to call reality, which is Tommy and his wife, Izzy. And she is dying from a brain tumor. And Tommy is a scientist, a doctor, and he's trying to find a cure for like a disease for brain tumors or for tumors in general. And then we have the story of the Conquistador, which is really a story that Izzy is writing. She's writing a novel. What I thought was, like, those two are pretty straightforward. It's pretty clear and it's easy to follow along. I just thought the whole story that Izzy is writing, the Conquistador one, that story serves its purpose to provide us a backstory for the third story, which is the Space Monk one.
All right.
And this is where my question is.
Sure.
The Space Monk, what do you think that story is? I have my theory on what it is, but what is it?
So to me, that whole Space Monk story, it's very enigmatic, right? So it's this guy floating in this spherical spaceship with a tree, which is the Tree of Life, and he's flying through space, and he's flying towards Xibalba, which Izzy had mentioned earlier is the place Mayans believe where all dead souls go to be reborn. So, in my view, this Space Monk, what he's trying to achieve is to bring this tree, which is symbolic of Izzy. Izzy has become this tree, essentially, and he's trying to take her to Xibalba where she can be reborn, and he's trying to achieve like an immortal life with her, to relive, what he had in present day, what present day Tommy had. Well, he missed out on. Well, Izzy died, right? So he's trying to revive her, I guess.
Okay.
So that's a story within. That's the objective of Space Monk, Tommy. But I don't view it as a separate timeline. I don't think it's continuous. So I see that as more of a metaphorical story going on within Tommy. It's not actually happening. How do you guys feel it?
So I think generally, like you said, right? I mean, I don't know if it's a tree of life. I think it's just her, because at the end of the movie, he plants a seed, and we know that when she talks about her guide, her Mayan guide, and he says that if you dig up my father's grave, you're not going to see him. He kind of grew into the wood of the tree, this and that. And I mean, like you said, right? This is symbolic of Izzy. I think it actually is Izzy. To this guy.
In a way, because that's Izzy's belief, right? That you continue to live, that death isn't the final step, that there is some continuation after that. So go ahead.
And then he also has rings. Like there's certain like details. Like for example, he has rings on his arm, and I think those are dates. That's how old he is. And then some little details. I think when she gives him a pen. I think towards the middle of the movie when she's in the hospital room. And then in the beginning-ish of the movie, he has that pen, but it's like badly worn out. So
it's badly worn out with the Space Monk, right? He's
with the Space Monk.
He's inking himself.
He's tattooing himself.
Right.
It gives the impression that, I mean, it kind of culminates because at the end of the movie, or not at the end of the movie, to like 3/4 of it, when she dies, he goes to the lady and his boss, and he's like, look, death is a disease like any other, and he has to find a cure, and ultimately he does find a cure, and he becomes the space monk, in the sense that
you want to go with the literalist interpretation, right? That Tommy has found a cure to aging, which he does in the movie. They talk about the developments with the drug and how it's stopping aging, but not, it doesn't cure cancer, but it stops aging. So you think
but
Tommy
at the very
has,
end, they say that it is shrinking the tumor.
It is, but it's too late for Izzy.
Yeah, it's too late for Izzy, but like it's still a quote unquote a cure.
It makes humans immortal, essentially, and that's why he's able to. I mean, if it was in his mind, which at some point I was thinking about it, but why would those details need to be there? The rings on his arm, the badly worn out pen, stuff like that.
I am more in line with Usher here. I did not think it was just purely metaphorical. I thought it was a real timeline. It was post-death Tommy, but pre-rebirth Tommy. So the middle stage between this life and the afterlife.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff mentioned during the movie, how death is Death is an act of creation. Oh, and yes, death is the road to awe, right? When he's making his journey to Xibalba, and he only, I guess, is reborn. Obviously, he enters Xibalba, but it's also after the tree dies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of comes to terms with the regrets he had. And once he is at peace with his life, life on Earth, then he's reborn, and that visual is him literally becoming part of the Xibalba Nebula.
He leaves the tree bubble into his smaller bubble, and he goes into the nebula or the star, and then the star explodes.
Yeah, he disintegrates into the nebula.
Yeah.
And he becomes part of it, pretty much. So he's being reborn with that nebula. That's how I saw it, and I saw it as a literal thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was only once he came to the realization of letting go of some closure, because he loses Izzy, right? The tree dies. I agree that was Izzy, or represents Izzy at the very least. And once he lets go, he's able to find that peace, and he's able to leave the bubble and be reborn within Xibalba.
Sure. So you're suggesting Tommy has not been at peace for millennia, that he's been traveling through space, and he finally accepts the finality of life.
He did die on Earth, and then this is that journey to the afterlife.
Oh,
and you don't reach it until you are at peace.
So
that's kind of
so
how
you
I
saw
it.
this as a soul of Tommy in this bubble.
Yeah, I guess a soul represented in a body, space monk.
All right.
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, I don't think I necessarily agree with that. I think it is a bit more literal. I think he is
that he never died on Earth, that he just continued living and got into this spaceship.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think he died. I think that he achieved his ultimate goal. And I think with the dying of Izzy part is interesting, because she dies twice. And she dies twice very tragically, because you have the scene where basically he's working very hard to develop a cure for his wife's illness. And the second he does, literally the second he figures out the cure, he finds out that the cure works, at that very moment is when she dies. And it's immensely tragic, because it's right when you have everything is when you lose everything. At the same time, right when he's about to reach Xibalba, that's exactly when the tree dies. It doesn't die before, but the second death of that tree happens right when he needs it to be alive. Yeah, I thought that stuff was interesting, and I guess I'm trying to think of it, if it's more of his soul kind of going through this process. It requires more thinking on my part, I think.
I like that interpretation of the second death. I saw that more metaphorically, but yeah, it's interesting. I'll have to kind of reframe some things to view it that way.
So yeah, Usher, I agree with you. I think there's two deaths for Izzy. The first one on Earth, and then the second one in that as a tree in that little bubble. This is gonna hit on one of the themes of the movie, right? It's just very simple. It's cherishing what you have now, and we see throughout the movie in the Tommy timeline when he's the doctor that he's so determined to finding this cure that he's not cherishing the last moments he has left on Earth with Izzy. And even like, his boss is like, what are you doing here? You should be with Izzy after she has a stroke.
Yeah. There's a scene where Izzy pops into his office and she's like, it's the first snow. Come out to, to spend time with her.
And they replay that like 4 times, right? He's missing it every time. Like as in except for the last time.
Yeah.
It's at the very end of the movie where he decides, you know what, I'm going to run out there. And that's why I think it is. Well, maybe I guess what Usher is saying is also very plausible, that he just never died, because he's recalling that moment where he had the chance to go with her rather than go into the surgery room. Because it's right before he comes to peace at the tree in the bubble as a space monk. He's imagining him going outside with Izzy and walking in the snow. So maybe that's true. But in general, the whole point is he needs to cherish what he has. And even after the tree dies, after Izzy's second death, he understands that. He comes to that realization, like, I should have cherished what I had when I had it. That's like when he's at peace, more or less. And cause it's like the first time he smiles. Like, he smiles at the very end, as a space monk, at least.
Usher gave like a very literalist interpretation, right? That Tommy never dies, that because he has a cure to immortality, that he continues to live as a space monk. To me, whether or not that's the case, it kind of hinges on one thing. Did Tommy accept Izzy's death? I think he does. In that scene at the very end where he plants the seed on Izzy's grave, that's a form of him accepting Izzy's death. And so if he's come to peace with the fact that death is necessary, I don't think he would have sought immortality. He would have died there. And what we were seeing as Space Monk Tommy, that was more of a mental abstraction.
It kind of hints to like why I thought maybe that space monk stuff is just his journey to the afterlife.
Okay.
Whatever that may be.
Sure.
Like, and here they interpret it as like the Mayan version of it, right?
Sure. That the dead souls are going towards Xibalba.
Yeah, and that's where they were reborn.
Yeah, that is actually very interesting. And when I was watching this movie, I was thinking, because this guy's he's like a scientist. He knows how medicine works. He knows how things really dawned on him when his wife was when she couldn't feel, didn't have sensitivity to hot and cold. But the thing is that this guy's a doctor. He knows how medicine works. He knows that things have to be approved. You can't just like
a random compound and inject it into a monkey, right?
And a human being, and he does play very loose with that stuff with the monkey. But he's got to know at some point deep down inside that this stuff's never going to make it. And so it kind of makes you wonder, like, because he's very aggravated and angry throughout.
It's a part of his denial, right?
Yeah, it's this type of weird denial, kind of slash-ish, acceptance that he fundamentally cannot do anything. And I think that's when I mentioned hubris, is that like he's losing his wife, that's fine. But I think his lack of control, because he does seem like a very controlling guy, right, in the lab and this and that. And this is not an interpretation that I'm going to give as like the general interpretation, just something else that I was thinking, because he has fundamentally no control. He's faced with his own immortality, and it's manifest most in his wife. But he was kind of like already like, there's just no way it didn't occur to him already that she's gonna die, this and that, and there's no way he thought in his head that he's gonna take this this serum and then like inject it into her at the hospital or something like that. Like, this stuff takes time to make to make it to market, this and that. And so
I think if he had found that to be a cure, he would have taken a chance and he would have accepted the consequences. The consequences meaning he would have lost his license to practice whatever he was doing, whether he was a medical doctor or scientist. He would have accepted the consequences to his professional life to save Izzy.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, because like this element of hubris just really stands out. Like when at the end, because the Conquistador, when he stabbed the tree, and he puts some on his wound, and his wound heals. I mean, he could have just left it there, but like he just got really greedy, and he just drinks a lot of it. And there's some interesting imagery there also.
I think it's a callback to the Garden of Eden, right? And they mention it briefly in the story as well, that the tree of life from the Garden of Eden was lost because of greed, essentially.
So I'm not sure about this. So there's 2 trees, right? The tree of knowledge, tree of life, so they're saying the tree of life is the one that was taken out of heaven and hid on the earth. That's what they say, right? Okay.
By the way, just before we move on, did you guys have any thoughts on the ring? Because I mean, there's like throughout the movie, there's like this imagery of like kind of like a ring structure or something circular. But why does he lose his ring? Like whatever happens to it, like he leaves his ring in the same exact spot.
While he's,
I don't remember them talking about what happened to his ring. I mean, he says, I leave it in the same exact spot, and suddenly he doesn't have his ring anymore, and he never finds it either. Actually,
I see it as what it literally is symbolizing in our general culture, right? Which is a symbol of commitment, and him losing that ring, I read it as him, same thing, focusing his efforts and time on the wrong thing. It should have been like, hey, like if he's losing the ring, meaning he's losing his commitment to what he really should be doing, is spending time with Izzy while she's dying. That's just how I saw it, like literally like that. Yeah. And then he has a regret of it, because then he obviously tattoos the ring on himself, because he realizes, well, I should have been with Izzy the whole time.
So as Izzy's dying, she's had a seizure, and Tommy's sent out of the room while the doctors try to revive her. He's in the hallway, and he sees a man. He's shaking in his bed, and he's wearing a ring. And at that point, Tommy notices his own missing ring. So does Tommy see himself in that character? Is that interpretation you guys took?
I think it's just a reminder again that he messed up, because he took off that ring initially to do that surgery, right? He shouldn't have been doing that. He should have gone out for that walk with Izzy. He should have never lost the ring. I don't know. Like I'm seeing it very simplistically like that. Maybe there's more. I don't know. And then obviously the image of a dying man is gonna shake him.
Sure.
Usher, did you have anything about the ring?
I don't know really what to make of the guy with the ring. I mean, with the fact that yes, the camera does show his ring. I when I looked at that, I'm just like, you have this guy who's deathly afraid of death, unable to cope with it, and that's just another added thing which makes him terrified. I mean, the whole thing is basically him afraid of death, either his wife's or his own or something. And so that was just like difficult image to see. You have this old guy who's trying to say something, but he has a tube in his mouth, and he's not able to say anything, and it's kind of just this really distressing imagery kind of just imposed on the main character, and he's just like, dang, this is like, I don't want this.
I mean, he even says like how death is just a disease like any other, and it needs a cure. Like he has not accepted death as a part of reality whatsoever.
I wanted to ask, this might be a bit more rated R, but the tree of life, it looks very biological, if you get my drift, and like it falls really on the earth, and then from that life sprouts.
You're talking about the sap?
The sap, yeah. What it looked like.
Yeah. I heard that.
No, I had the same thought.
Yeah, and then there was another scene referring to kind of similar images. So the space monk, he's traveling in a spaceship. As it's approaching Xibalba, we see like concentric circles, and it kind of looks like a womb, I guess. But what's the overall point? It's like we see these images. What are we supposed to make of it?
I mean, he's about to be reborn, so maybe you're right. That is a womb, I guess, or an egg.
Yeah.
In a womb. Yeah, no, but Usher, I noticed that too.
It's interesting how the director kind of plays with this type of this type of imagery.
Oh, for sure. It's like the little details, right? But the connections.
I mean, I'm assuming that's what sap looks like, also. But like,
I would mention, or both of you guys mentioned how Izzy is the tree in the Space Monk's bubble. I mean, I think the most clear evidence for that is when he talks to the tree, he's talking to it as if it is Izzy, and the hairs like come up.
Right.
And it's literally the same exact way when he talks to Izzy when they're in bed together, and he's like whispering into her neck. I mean, her hairs don't come up the same way, but the imagery is like very identical.
And there's also a scene in the bathtub where Izzy's laying in the bathtub. I think the prior scene is actually of the tree, and they like visually blend the tree's bark and Izzy's skin together, and there's a lot of stuff going on to try to like draw that conclusion that Izzy is the tree is Izzy.
Oh, but then I have one question: why is he eating from that tree, the space monk?
Because it's nourishment; it's giving him life.
I also thought that it had something to do with the guy. The guide was telling her that when a sparrow or a bird or something eats from the fruits, then it becomes part. So I was thinking that he was eating the tree kind of in this very so that it becomes kind of part of him. But that's a bit loose of an interpretation. And I think it might be better just to think of it as nourishment. Maybe despite solving death, he might still need something, by means of
Sure.
nourishment.
I saw online another reviewer had pointed out. I would have never known this because I don't know too much about Christianity. But there's where he's eating the bark. Someone drew that similarity to what is it called? It's a sacrament.
When they have the wine and
Yeah.
bread piece, whatever.
The stuff that Catholics do.
Yeah, that's also an interesting thing. I think, kind of like the blood and flesh of Christ, and he's kind of eating the flesh of his wife, so that she becomes part of him.
I will say that I did enjoy this movie, right? I mentioned that watching it for the second time, it was a lot better than what I remembered it being. But it just really depends on who you are as a person and what your mindset is going into that movie. Because one, you kind of have to pay attention a lot because a lot of the cues are visual. We really haven't talked so much about the Conquistador story.
Yeah.
Again, I do feel like there's not as much to talk about because I think it's more or less a bridge between the reality story and the space monk story. It kind of blends those two,
for sure.
Or it provides context for those
What do you
two.
make of the Conquistador unwillingly going to his death? He thinks he's got immortality on his hands with drinking the sap. You see the terror on his face as things are sprouting from his body and he's dying.
Yeah, so I think Usher hit it perfectly. Like, it's just his greed, his hubris there, where he's like, oh, I'm gonna live forever, so I'm gonna drink as much of this as I can. And theoretically, isn't he living forever now because he's part of the earth and he's just gonna be alive, like through the? But it's just not what he thought it would be.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because Tommy in the present day has completed the story, so he's writing this part as this Conquistador unwillingly going to his death. I think for Tommy writing this, he's kind of describing his past framework of how he viewed death. So he's describing how he was previously unwilling,
like the cure.
Right? That he was previously unwilling to accept death, and he's writing it almost as his past.
Well, so what do you think? Do you think that is it tying back to his own cure that he found, and maybe it backfires a certain way?
It could be, yeah. I can see that.
Honestly, the more we talk about all this, it makes me believe Usher's literal sense that he just continues living.
That he continues living? Yeah, it's attractive because he does find the cure. But I just go back to that scene where he plants the seed. If he's somewhat accepted his death at that point, I see no reason why he would continue on living for that long. Just to go to Xibalba and to make the same conclusion that Izzy is dead.
That he already made on Earth.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We see Tommy writing the final chapter of Izzy's story only as Tommy as a space monk, right? We don't see present day Tommy kind of finishing the story, like penning it out. What do you make of that? I kind of thought of it this way, that Space Monk Tommy is kind of like a future Tommy, so he's accepting it at some point later in his life, while present-day Tommy hasn't accepted it. So at some point in the future, he's ready to write the final chapter.
I did think that it was present-day Tommy that actually finished the story. I didn't think... They never show him writing it in the space bubble. He's only using that pen to tattoo himself.
Right, but then he's receiving messages from Izzy, like finish it.
To finish
he's
it.
He's hearing the voice, as he's floating through space.
Well, I think at that point, she also says finish it in real life, right?
She does.
And I think when she says it in real life, she's saying it for him to finish the book. I think when he's hearing it over and over in the space bubble, it's because...
It's a lingering memory?
It's his own death. He needs to have closure to finish it, to move on to the next thing. Like, I just think he's stuck in this little space until he comes to peace terms with himself and death or reality. Yeah. So that's how I interpreted that finish it in the bubble, because I did think he finished the story itself. But the story, like on Earth, it means the story. In the bubble, it means your own acceptance of reality. Sure. That's how I interpreted it.
Yeah, I think I agree with that interpretation more. It's more likely, more valuable an interpretation, I think.
So even though there's a little bit of disagreement on how we interpret things, I think we can all agree that no matter how you're interpreting certain things, we come to the same conclusion, which is eventually Tommy accepts the finality of death. Izzy's death, we can't come to the same conclusion. So I liked how the movie inherently doesn't need much hand-holding.
Yeah, surprisingly it doesn't. Considering how abstract all this stuff is, it really doesn't need, like you said, it didn't need that exposition in the dialogue at all.
You guys were mentioning the writing and on his arm, and initially I took this to be rings of his age, like a tree, But and then she constantly, because basically he's having these memories of her, and he's spent his entire life thinking about this one woman and like obsessing over her, and she keeps saying finish it, and I wonder if perhaps he's writing the story on his own.
Oh, that's an interesting observation.
Very loose interpretation of that.
I definitely think that Space Monk Tommy, at that point, he's finally writing the final chapter of the book. So I interpreted it as Tommy finishing the story at some point in the future, that his acceptance of death comes sometime later after present day Tommy. We finish off present day Tommy's story, but it's somehow in the future. Just curious, how many times have you seen this movie?
I do a khatam of it like once every year or maybe once every other year, but I've watched it, or that's what I tell myself, but I probably watched it 8 times in my life.
I think I've seen it about as many, maybe closer to like five or six at least.
You guys are crazy. This is my second time only.
So when
it's a short movie.
It's a short movie.
When I first watched in 2008, in that same year I watched it I think 3 times. And then over the years, every 3 years I watch it, I guess.
Yeah, the soundtrack is amazing. I listen to the soundtrack even when I write. I mean, Death is a Rota, that particular soundtrack, like just the way it builds up, like even when it's in the movie itself, or like you think it reaches its like climax. I don't know what the music terms are, but then it pauses, and then it's like just there's no noise, and then boom, there's like this explosion, and then there's all this noise, and you get elevated to this next level of musical experience. But at the same time in the movie, like that's when the star explodes, and he just kind of like he has this weird smile on his face as like his body's like going through that weird thing, and he's just like experiencing this kind of different new. And I think the way the movie put the music and the imagery together was just amazing.
It was no, for sure. I think Clint Mansell is like very, very talented. All right. I think we're at a good spot here.
Yeah, I think we mentioned everything.
Yeah, so I'll just say that this movie is an interesting watch. It is a good watch. Again, if you are a Darren Aronofsky fan, you'll probably like it. It is pretty abstract. There's a lot of visual themes and motifs that you need to pay attention to. The writing is not all that, but it's deliberate. It's important. It is clunky. Entertainment wise, I still don't know if this is an entertaining movie, but it doesn't necessarily need to be entertaining for it to be a good piece of art, and I think this is a good piece of art. All right, so we'll leave it at that. Usher, thank you for being the very first guest on the Twice Over Movies podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing more conversations like this with guests, because of course guests are a bit more invested in the movie, that they ask for recommendations than the hosts. So it kind of maybe I don't want to say balances it out, but adds a different perspective to the conversation. So again, thank you so much for having me.
It was great having you.
Thanks for listening to this production of The Twice Over. If you haven't already, subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcast, and remember to support us on Patreon or by sharing the podcast with a friend. Feel free to contact us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at The Twice Over, or email us at comments@thetwiceover.com. All of the music you heard is from Amerigo Gazaway. Check him out on Bandcamp and Spotify.